Hi, in this video I want to discuss how to build a simple .NET Core API, how to Dockerize it and how to run it. I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks on how to do this quickly. But for now, let's get started and create a new a new .NET API. So I'm just using the templating engine to actually build a sample B application. So let's go into that. Sample B. And let's just open this up in Visual Studio Code. I'm just going to dive into launch setting. I'm just going to remove the HTTPS. Yes, I'm fully aware that you can add it as a certificate and you can enable HTTPS over, but I proxy everything in Azure, so therefore I don't actually need HTTPS running on the native. It's something that's handled by a proxy and load balancer for me. If you do want to host this with HTTPS, feel free to leave that in. I'm just going to build this puppy. Just open up the terminal in Visual Studio. It's easier for you all to see. .NET build. We can see that we've built them artifacts. We've built a debug version of it, and it's now ready for sampling. We can run this puppy as well. And I've just sealed. So I've done a .NET run, and I've got it running. It's now on port 5000. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to do a CL and go and get that data. So nothing special. This is just the boilerplate .NET Core app. They've upgraded it now to use the weather forecast, which is pretty cool. So let's Dockerize this, shall we? As always, the first thing we need to do is to have a Dockerfile. If I can spell it correctly. So Dockerfile. So we get our Dockerfile. We want to specify an operating system. Now, based on what version of .NET Core you're using, you need to work out which is the best operating system, and Docker Hub is the best place for that. Okay, so if I look at my app is targeting 3.1. It's quite a good stable release to be targeting. So what I'm going to do is in my Docker file, I'm going to choose the Microsoft's 3.1 ASP.NET Core. Just be careful, it says ASP.NET, but it's not ASP.NET, it's just what they've named it. So it doesn't have to be ASP or anything like that. It's not even MVC. It's just, this is just bare bones .NET Core. So we've got an API here. This is a base operating system, so it's just the runtime. So I'm going to need an SDK in because I want to build it within the Docker file. I don't want to be responsible for building this stuff myself. Let's get Docker to do it for me. And because I generally get this wrong, I don't know if you guys do, but I seem to get the syntax wrong over and over again. So what I do is I try and test it out on the command line. So if I do .NET build, I should get a successful build, and I do, which is cool. What I want to do is restore any packages. So I want to do .NET restore, and I believe that restore takes in the proj file. So that would be sample B proj file. Right, cool. So I take that command, and I'm just going to copy it and put it up as a comment up at the top. And now I've restored any packages that this thing might need. The next thing to do is to publish it in release mode. So, okay, like I say, I got that wrong a couple of times, so I've just done that. And what I should now have is I should have a publish folder, which I do. So I'm just going to take that and paste that in and record that. And I believe that that's it. I should be able to just run the DLL now. I've been doing .NET and then publish and the name of the DLL, which would be sample DLL. And cool, I get the app running. Now, if I take that .NET sample, copy that, paste that in. What I can now do is Dockerize this a little bit and convert these commands that I would normally be typing by hand and get Docker to do the legwork for me. Now, remember here we've just got the basic runtime environment. So now I've got that, what I want to do is import the SDK environment. With the SDK, I want to run the restore. But to do that, remember that we're in a Docker environment now. We've created a brand new Linux operating system. We've got two, in fact. We've got our base and we've got our build. So this operating system just has the runtime, and this operating system has the SDK, but it ain't got any of our code. So what I want to do for the first thing is just a very quick copy of the sample B proj file, and I'm just going to copy that over to the source directory. Now what we're doing here is we're saying create a base operating system with runtime, and let's create a folder called /app. And remember, it's runtime Docker images, so /app is fine in this scenario. If you're a system administrator for Linux machines, you might be cringing. It's fine with Docker containers to do /app. You don't need to be putting it in some crazy Linuxy subdirectory. So build, we'll put everything in the source directory and we'll make it our current working directory. We are now running in this operating system. So when we copy the sample, what we're doing is we're saying copy this file and copy it into this Linux environment, this container. Now we've done that, I want us to run the restore. Now there's a trick here in that I don't want to run this locally. It's not my machine that I'm running it on. It's this new Linux machine that we're doing. So Docker has a run property. And what that's saying is run this command on this operating system. Create this operating system, set it up, get it up and running, create a source folder, and run this command in it. If all goes well with this run and we're managing to download and install all of the project requirements, then I'm going to copy across all of the code. Now the dot notation basically is copy everything here, copy it out of your local file system and copy it into this Linux environment. And it's all going to get stored into source. So now on this Linux environment, should you remote into it, you would have /source, /properties, /launch settings. All these files are now copied into this new Linux machine. So we've done the restore. The next little trick is to do the build. So let's have a look at this. We need to run it in the Linux box, so we're going to use a run command. Docker publish. That was just a sample that I copied, so it's sample B proj file, and we want it to go into a folder called source publish, and it's going to be a release build that we're doing. We knew that these commands work to a certain degree up here because we run them on the command line, so we know we've got a good chance of this working. Now, the interesting thing here is that I don't want to be running my app with an SDK version of Linux. With a Linuxy version with .NET Core SDK on it. I just want the runtime. So what I want to do now is just dive back to this container, dive back to this version of Linux that I've got running. And I can do that just by using the alias. So I can say from base and call it final. So what we're doing is we're taking this name and we're going to give it another alias, which we're going to call as final. I'll explain why in a second. And I just want to copy this published stuff out. That's all I'm interested in from a runtime environment. I just want the stuff that we've built. So I want to set up a working directory, and I'm just going to call that app. And that's because we already did it up here, so I'm just going to reuse that. And what I want to do is now copy all of the stuff, but I'm not copying from the local folder. You know, I don't want to copy all this stuff. I've already got that. I've built it. I want the stuff that's built. But the stuff that's built is in this Linux operating system. So I want to copy the stuff out of this Linux operating system into this Linux operating system. So I've got a server up and running. I've got another server up and running. I built it in this server, but this server knows nothing about it. So I won't be able to copy from a server. Now, luckily, the copy does have a from syntax. And what you can do is you can say copy from the build server, and notice that build is here. If I'd have called that XXX, it would be XXX there. It's just an alias name for that server. So I'm going to copy from build, and I'm going to copy the source, and I think it was the publish, and all the stuff that's in publish. I just want to copy it across to the root directory. But remember, that's the current working directory that we're going to be in on that server. So we're copying everything from publish into app. Now the final piece, is to run the puppy. So we now want to run it. And remember, we want to run it on the machine itself. We want to run it on this Linux box. Now you could be forgiven for saying that I want to do the run command. So you could say run that, and all fits and purposes, it would work. However, with Docker, they've got something called an entry point, and really you should use that entry point for that final push, and it takes an array of options. The reason being is that different operating systems have different ways of handling spaces, carriage returns, new lines, and how it handles forward slashes and backslashes. And this notation allows it to convert it to a Debian system, a Oryx system, a Windows system, and it'll just make it run. Now, I just want to double check if this is even working. So I'm just going to do a Docker build. I'm going to tag it as test. What I want to do as well is I want to take away all cache, just so we get a really good understanding of what's happening. And I'll explain this in a second. So cool, we got a running thing, and just to play about with this, just to show you, if I run this now, I want to remove it once I've finished. The port is going to be, say, 80, 80, 80, and it's going to be running on the container, or in the container on port 80. So I'm basically mapping the container port 80 to my local 8088. Just made it up, and it's the test container that I've just made. Oh, in traditional fashion, I've made a mistake. So it's not published because we took everything from the publish folder and put it in here. So there is no publish folder inside app. It's just app. So let's run that again. Let's do a Docker build. A run. And we now see that that's running. Should I connect to it, I'm going to get the data back. It will work. I'm not going to show you that. Just trust me, I'm a doctor. So I'm just going to do this build again because what I want to do is explain this a little bit deeper. You'll notice this series of steps. And step one is to pull down the ASP.NET code. That's just a base operating system, and we run it. And we get this unique hash, and that dictates what that looks like. We've created a working directory called app, and this together now has created a unique hash. So we can move this now and use this hash as this base system. The next thing we're doing is we're going to pull down the SDK, and that has its own unique hash, but we're going to put our source directory in there, which means we get another unique hash. This hash now indicates an operating system or an image that has got SDK 3.1 and it's got a folder in it called source. Now we're going to run the command to copy the sample, and we get this hash. And then when we restore, we end up having this hash. So if we was to just get this image and restore this image, we would end up with a Linux operating system with the SDK, with an app folder, and with sample B in it. Now the great thing is that if nothing changes, if this SDK doesn't change, I might as well carry on using this image instead of rebuilding it. I've already got it. I've not changed anything. It's a bit like writing a Word document and putting, your diary from yesterday, then deleting it. just before you go to bed and typing it all out again. If you've already done it, leave it alone. So we copy the sample project file across and we restore it. And once we've restored it, we'll get this. Now I'm just going to say this again. If I use that image, I'm going to get a, a Linuxy version operating system that's got the runtime. It's got an app folder. It's got the sorry. Let me start again. Sorry, because it's this bit here that's important. If I was to restore this image, what we're going to get is we're going to get a Linux SDK with a source folder that's got the sample B copied across from it, and we've restored all the package files needed for that project to run. And that's that image. If none of this changes, we will get the same image back. Because if I don't update the project file, if I don't update what libraries are needed, I'm going to get the exact same image. So I can keep on reusing it. It's awesome. From that, I am then going to do a build. And once I've built it, I've got my release, I get my new image, I then copy it across to this runtime, and I'll get this runtime environment, and this will end up being one of my final images that I can then run and use as an image that I can fire up. And if I was to, fire up test, what I'm actually doing is saying, fire up that image. Now, what I want to do now is take out no cache. And when I run this, it's instant. It's literally instant. As soon as I press run, it's run. The reason being, all it's doing is it's going, has anything changed? No, I'll use the cache. Has anything changed? No, I'll use the cache. And you can see, using cache, using cache, using cache, using cache. It didn't actually do any work. It didn't even compile. It did nothing because it knows that the outcome from this is identical. Therefore, there's no work to do. And I'll just give you your image back. And you know what? Because the image is the same, bleh, you can have the same image back. I'm not even doing any work there. Now, that means that you can break your Dockerfile up into non-little pockets of work. And you can really utilize this caching technique to say, do this bit of work. Now do this bit of work. Because I know that this stuff is 95% the same every time. Maybe this bit of work here is different. And you can start using and building your Docker files with a bit of clarity to say what does change the most. If you are in a project and in a solution that's got 20 projects in it, but you know that only 2 or 3 of them inner projects change, then break them all up. Build all of the projects that don't change as one blob, and then the ones that do change often, put them in another blob. That way you're utilizing cache, and you'll find that your builds are instant. For anyone using Visual Studio out there, if Visual Studio does something similar, if your code hasn't changed, it doesn't bother recompiling and rebuilding that project. But if you do it on the command line like this, it will. And you can utilize Docker then to build these images. So this is a basic high-level overview of how to build a Docker file that does something interesting, how you can utilize 2 different operating systems, 2 different images, one that's a runtime, one that's the SDK, how you can split your work up so that you get these different steps to utilize this caching methodology, and how to build a .NET Core API app. All you need to do now is decorate this with your real code, run the Docker file, and boom, you've got a containerized image ready to deploy on whatever platform you want. How cool is that?